Welcome back, guys. Today is the first day that we do actually, it's the sixth day of the countdown to Christmas, and this one is the first story that isn't a Christmas Carol. Today we have Frosty the Person of Snow, spelled with a U because feminism. So great. This one is actually my favorite as it is the wokest of all the stories. I don't know, it's so great. Okay, and the art is by Mochi. You'll see lots of art. We have quite a bit for this story, so I hope you enjoy. Bobby and Betty were two siblings who fought over everything. Sometimes they fought over big things, sometimes they fought over little things. And as with most male-female conflicts, communication patterns they usually couldn't even agree on, which issues were big and which were little. No amount of crisis intervention would get them to stop bickering. One winter day, their frustrated caregiver sent them outside to play. A layer of fresh snow had fallen the previous night, the first of the season, and the world outside looked as heavily frosted as a matrimonial enslavement cake. As everything around them glistened, Bobby and Betty tried to agree on what games to play. Should they make a snow fort? Too militaristic, said Betty. How about snow angels? No, commented Bobby. They had been raised agnostic. Besides, such a public display of religious figures might make others uncomfortable. And so it was with sledding, skating, and snowball fights. All were rejected work for some one reason or another. Then Betty suggested that they create people out of snow. Try as he might, Bobby couldn't find anything wrong with his sister's idea, so they each started to roll the biggest snowballs they could. Then they sat these on top of each other for a body. Betty rolled a smaller snowball for a head and lifted it high atop the other two. They used two twigs to give it arms, and two lumps of coal and a button to give it a face. Bobby wanted to put a corncob pipe in its mouth, but Betty objected, saying the implied endorsement would harm the more impressionable children in the neighborhood. Bobby said angrily, "When I make a snowman, he always has a corncob pipe." "What do you mean?" answered Betty. "This was my idea. I say it's a snow woman." "But it's shaped like a man," said Bobby. "Only to a phallocentric worldview like yours," said Betty. "How can it be a woman if we use the old top hat? Women don't wear top hats." "Oh yeah? What about Marlene Dietrich?" And so it continued, with neither side budging an inch and the snow figure standing there, a silent witness in a snip. In a snip, Bobby decided to show his sibling that it was indeed a masculine snow individual, and slammed the hat on top of its head. As soon as he did so, a quick gust of wind blew about them, and snow crystals spun around and around like a frigid tornado. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the wind settled down. Bobby and Betty wiped the snow from their eyes. They were about to resume their argument when an innocent voice asked, "What's all the fuss about?" The siblings stopped and turned to the source of the voice. There, right where they had just assembled their frigid figure, stood a living, breathing, and fully articulate snow being. Their mouths fell open as they stared at this marvel. "It seems like such a silly argument," it continued, "especially since you neglected to give me any private parts." Betty regained her composure quickly. "I don't care if you were born only an instant ago," she said. "How can you be so naive as to think a person's gender is determined by their physical equipment? It's a cultural issue, first and foremost." "If you want to get huffy," retorted the newcomer, "tell me why you were going to assign me a gender without asking me my preference first." Betty's face reddened at her insensitivity. "So what would you prefer?" asked Bobby. "After watching the way you two communicate, I prefer neither. I think I'd like to be called a person of snow." "And what should your name be?" asked Betty, trying to make amends. "In a postmodern comment on the preconceptions of society at large, I'm going to choose the most obvious name possible. You can call me Frosty." Bobby and Betty agreed that it was a wonderful name. The arrival of their There's your Frosty on the screen now. The arrival of their new friend was so magical and exciting that the children completely forgot their earlier argument. Frosty and the pre-adults danced and played and laughed together for hours, with nary a crossword between the siblings. As the sun climbed in the sky, the children continued to scamper about, but Frosty began to feel wet and heavy. Soon the person of snow was having a difficult time keeping up with the pre-adults. What's the matter, Frosty? They asked with concern. Oh, it's so hot, Frosty said. I'm not made of flesh and blood like you. If the temperature keeps rising, soon there'll be nothing left of me. The Earth's layer is getting warmer due to the depletion of the ozone layer, said Bobby matter of factly. We learned all about it at Montessori school. The ozone layer, repeated Frosty. I don't know what that is, but we better do something about it fast, or I'll turn into a puddle of water. How about a march on Washington? Suggested Betty. Yes, that's exactly the thing, said her brother. Then let's hurry, said Frosty. If enough of us march, the government will have to take action. Frosty ran through the neighborhood, mobilizing the rest of the snow citizens. In backyards and front yards, in parks and in playgrounds, snow persons of every size and shape listened to Frosty's plan. The magic from its top and the passion in its speech enabled them all to throw off the icy chains of passivity and take positive action for their own survival. Soon the charismatic Frosty had gathered a good-sized crowd, ready to take their argument to the government. Bobby and Betty did their parts as well. They rounded up their dog Spout and their kitty Puff and prepared to head off. Then they called their friends Amut and Fatima, and their friends Hoshi and Shinwa, and their friends Shadrach and Luminaria, and their friend Heather and her two mommies, and the whole crowd joined in with the march of the persons of snow. Frosty walked at the head of the parade, holding a broomstick high. Others carried signs and messages like "No ozone equals no snow zone" and "We won't just melt away." En route to Washington, they picked up other supporters, snow and non-snow alike. Frosty and friends also got the attention of the media, since the sight of a Rubenesque, dark-eyed snow person made such great TV for the video crews. Soon the marchers made it to the Capitol Mall where they were determined to camp until the president agreed to meet and hear their concerns. Where the icy protesters gathered, the mall looked as if it were covered with a plush white carpet, with tiny clusters of humans tossed on it like colorful scones. Unfortunately, Washington did not have a cool climate at all, and many of the persons of snow were beginning to feel very uncomfortable. It wasn't long before the news finally came. The vice president had agreed to speak with Frosty on television in a remote one-on-one discussion with the steps needed to halt ozone breakdown. Excitement rippled through the encampment on the mall. Finally, their concerns would be taken seriously. A camera crew came later that day and set up the chairs, monitors, and camera crews that would be needed. Bobby and Betty were particularly excited for Frosty, who is by now a dear friend. Ever since Frosty's arrival, in fact, the children had scarcely quarreled at all. Betty hugged Frosty around the neck and said, "We're so proud of you." "Aw, thanks," said Frosty, "but I haven't done much of anything yet. You should be proud of how everyone got together, snow and skin alike, and worked to protect the environment. Now please listen carefully. If anything should ever happen to me, I hope you two will be able to stop fighting once and for all and lead the movement in my place." Bobby and Betty promised their friend to do their best. It was time for the broadcast to begin. The TV people tried to put some makeup on Frosty to cut down on the glare of its forehead, but soon realized the task was impossible. Frosty sat in the appointed chair and waited for the director's signal. Suddenly the lights went on and the sign was given that they were on the air. Out of respect for the office, Frosty let the vice president give the opening remarks. As the politician talked, the person of snow began to feel very warm and sluggish. When the vice president was through, Frosty tried to state the marcher's position firmly, but the person of snow was feeling so tired that it paused often and had trouble catching its breath. As time went on, Frosty slumped in the chair, looking worse and worse. By the time Bobby and Betty screamed, "Scott, stop, turn off the lights," it was too late. On national television, under the glare of the hot lights, Frosty had melted irrevocably into a gray pile of slush. Bobby and Betty were very sad for their friend, as were the rest of the protesters, but in the end, its demise was not tragic at all. Frosty had dramatized the plight of the ozone layer in a way that a squadron of scientists could never have. Everyone watching television that day was deeply moved by Frosty's brave sacrifice. Switchboards at the White House and the Capitol were lit up for hours, and within weeks, new guidelines were established for both industry and government agencies to reduce the emissions that were eating away at the ozone. Bobby and Betty took Frosty's top hat and went home. They tried to do as Frosty said and stop squabbling, but without their friend's calming influence, it was very hard for them. Their very different ideas about how to honor Frosty's memory and keep the movement alive couldn't be reconciled. As the weather got warmer, they moved on to other arguments and began to forget about their wintry friend. The next year, when they tried to recapture the magic of the first snowfall, they were unable to find Frosty's top hat and had to settle for making persons of snow who faced their fates silently and unflinchingly. The end. I hope you enjoyed our woke Frosty, and we will get reread another story tomorrow.